This is a continuous improvement movement reserved for the few with the grit to prove it. Everybody.
Good morning, Calvin. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic on this fine Friday morning. How you doing today?
Yes, Friday. Happy Friday. I am
Happy
doing good and
Friday.
I'm excited because today we're going to talk about an article released by CNBC. The article is titled Harvard Business School Professor Says This is the Number One Misconception About Failing. So, Calvin, this article
Mm.
speaks to the big difference between a mistake and failure. I would love for you to break down this difference a little bit.
All right. So there's a cultural trend right now that says, we should celebrate our mistakes, right? And learn from our mistakes. And yeah, that's generally true. But I look at mistakes and failure. I guess a mistake is a type of failure, maybe on a smaller scale, but I look at failure as a little bit bigger in a much bigger context, right? So if you look at a mistake, it's usually from a task you're trying to complete, right? Like baking a cake, for example, right? You're baking a cake, you're throwing all the ingredients in, you forgot to add an egg, and then you ruin the cake, right? That's a mistake, right? It's a known process. You skip a step, you forget to do something, and there it is, right? You got a mistake. A failure, though, is a bit bigger in scope in the sense that a failure is probably a bigger goal that you're trying to achieve, right? Hopefully, you're stretching yourself to achieve this goal. It's going to require the execution of many tasks. A lot of time there's no defined process. You're trying to create the process that you need to, execute in order to achieve the goal. So with failure, it's usually like you're stepping into the unknown and you're trying to figure your way there, and you may or may not succeed. You may or may not get there, right? I look at that as failure. And this celebrating your mistakes culture, I really think what we mean by that is to celebrate our failures, especially productive failures where you learn a lot in the process.
And I think it's also good to say that every time you're going to start something new, a new hobby, a new job, a new project, write a book that has never been written before, doing anything new in general is probably going to include some failure because you don't
Right.
have that defined process, and hopefully you're going to learn a lot along the way.
Yeah, like the article said, is almost anything that happens that, anything great that we can point to that exists in the world today started with a series of failures, right?
Mhm.
And failure is a precursor to success. So the key though is to make sure you're learning as much as you can from those failures. And that's what sets you up for success is learning.
Mhm. So what we're saying here, Calvin, is that mistakes don't lead to success, but failures do.
Right. Absolutely. Exactly. So yeah, mistakes again, it's like at the task level, right? I was supposed to do something. I knew I was supposed to do it. I usually do it, but I didn't do it this time. I made a mistake, right? It didn't work out. So um those kind of things don't lead you to success necessarily because you're just doing something you probably have already been doing, right? You know, we all have a job to do and we put a typo in the email you could correct the typo next time, but that's not necessarily, the path to success. That's just maybe the path to maintaining a status quo, if anything, right?
Mhm.
But what sets you up for success is trying for something greater, right? Shooting for the stars, and maybe you don't quite land on the star, but you do land on the moon, right? Uh, so that's the idea. You're pushing yourself beyond your current limits to something greater, and you find yourself in a place that's better than where you started. That's actually a success in itself. But I would say what's even more valuable in that experience is what you learn along the way, right? This it's making me think about my book, Fit: The Simple Science of Achieving Strategic Goals, right? In the book, woven into kind of the background, subcontext of the book is the 1960s moon mission with JFK, where
That's a huge
he
one, yeah.
said, Yeah, that's probably one of the greatest, if you really break it down, it's probably one of the single greatest achievements in the history of mankind to date, right? And, he kind of set the ambitious goal, hey, we're going to go to the moon within the decade, right? Within the 1960s. Nobody believed him in the beginning, but any 2 or 3 year old on the planet could aspire to achieving that goal and see something that as a nation we could be proud of, and we became the envy of the world and all those great things and in the act of. But we failed, I don't know how many missions before. I guess we failed 10 missions because Apollo 11 is the one that actually made it. But I guess there are a few other missions before that were precursors to a successful moon landing. And it just reinforces the point is we tried all these times and failed all these times, but every time we tried, we came up with something new, came up with something better. We learned from it, and each successive step was a little bit further than the previous step. So I think that's the idea of, how failure actually sets you up for success. And personally, I don't even like the context of the word failure because it's almost sounds final, but it's not final. It's the process of succeeding, right? You fail your way to success if you're doing it the right way.
And I think the last key point, Calvin, when we talk about failure is how do we learn from it?
The best method for maximizing learning from failure is a Japanese term called hansei, and it really means reflection, right? To look back on what you did and understand what went well, what didn't go well, and what could we learn from it, right? And you got to be honest with yourself about what didn't go well, because you're trying to tease out those nuggets of what would we if we did this again, what would we do differently so we can get closer to the outcome that we're looking for. Um, and by doing that, it kind of forces you to be critical of yourself and be honest about, what your role in the failure was, right? Or success, right? You should reflect on success as well and still try to tease out those opportunities for improvement. So reflection or hindsight actually creates or generates more ideas for improvement. So it's a really good continuous improvement tool in general. Some companies and some teams do this in a structural way. They call it post-mortem or after action review after projects or major events or things like that. And it's just a good way to kind of look back and see what the opportunities for improvement are, assuming there will be another time to come.
I like that. And that makes me think that after that reflection, after you learn from your failure, you really have to decide on that next step. So you don't say, okay, it didn't work, I learned from it, but then there's no action. So with that
Right.
reflection, there has come that action, and that's what makes it positive. When you take that next action and you go a little farther towards achieving that goal.
That's it. I'll leave you with another thought. And this is the improver method, right? You have a challenge, you have a goal, and then you iterate towards your goal. And this is based on sort of agile way of thinking and iterative improvement way of thinking. This is why I tend not to build long action lists,
Mhm.
because by the time you finish that action list, you're exhausted and you can't put anything else into, that project or that initiative, right? And you don't really learn anything until the whole list is done. So with the more iterative approach to improvement, you're making one change at a time, but then you're reflecting and looking back and doing hindsight on what there is to learn from that first step that you took, right? And then based on what you learn there, that informs your next step, right? So instead of saying, I'm going to do these 30 things and I'm going to get a great result, it's saying, I'm going to do this one thing because this one thing will either A, get me the furthest, or B, teach me the most, right? Or it will confirm a bias or hypothesis that I have, um, that will set me up for success in the next step. But you don't determine the second step until you've executed the first step and reflected on how it really went, right? Because yeah, as you can imagine, these 30, 40, 50 item action lists, and it takes 6 months to execute, there's no reflection, right? Until after 6 months. But if you take the iterative approach, there is a reflection after the first day, right? And it may debunk all the other theories and assumptions that you had in your head about how this is supposed to work. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think with the iterative / agile approach to continuous improvement, the fail fast, learn from failures, grow fast kind of people development is kind of embedded and baked into the process itself.
Yeah, I like that. And I was thinking with that 6 month approach, you probably, when you do your reflection, you probably won't even know, like, attach the action with the result because so
Right.
much time has passed. You're not sure
Yeah.
what
I mean,
generated the impact. Yeah.
it's the waterfall approach, right? It's kind of I think the whole world is moving away from waterfall and toward a more iterative, approach. And to your point, if I just did 50 things, it took me 6 months, I did 50 things, and then I saw a result, I have no clue which
Which
one of those
one?
50,
Mm-hmm.
right? It could have been 49 moved us backward, and one of us moved one action moved way forward. So you just don't know. And when someone says, "Oh man, I want to get a similar result, what should I do?" What are you gonna do? You're gonna hand them 50 items, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Better to hand them the one thing that made the big impact, one or
Mm-hmm.
two items.
Yeah.
So and that goes back to the scientific approach, right? Control all variables, make one change, measure the impact, reflect, how did it go? What went well, what didn't, what do we change next time? Run the next experiment, right, in a controlled way. And in doing so, you can isolate which exact thing that you did made the biggest impact on the results.
Mm-hmm. Calvin, thank you so much. And remember, let's celebrate our failures. They move us forward. Let's get better every single day. And we'll see you again around these parts next week. Happy Friday. For daily news on operational excellence and how it relates to current events, check us out on the Ticket to Freedom podcast.
Simply subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay up to date on the latest developments in continuous improvement.